Hello, Mangotsfield School. Welcome to this week's virtual assembly. I'm Mr Gilpin, and I hope you're all well. This week, I'm going to talk to you about recent events that have taken place in Bristol, but also worldwide, and the potential power of protest. Sunday, the 7th of June, saw a protest march for the Black Lives Matter campaign take place in Bristol, among other cities in the United Kingdom. It was on the whole a peaceful event, and many of you will know that during the march, though, the statue of Edward Colston was hauled down from its plinth in the centre of Bristol, and then it was rolled nearly a kilometre by the protesters to the floating harbour, where it was tipped into the docks. This act by a few has sparked a debate and conversations across the United Kingdom about our history as a country and ours as a city, and has put Bristol and these actions firmly into the limelight. But who was Edward Colston? Now, the name Colston is found a lot around the city of Bristol. Colston School, Colston Girls' School, Colston Tower, Colston Hall, Colston Avenue, where the statue was located, are all named after him, with several other roads. The statue, which was forcibly removed, had been put up in 1895, over 150 years after he had died. Colston himself was a trader and a merchant. He started out trading in cloth and wine around Europe. However, he made a considerable amount of his money through his work with the Royal African Company, of which he became deputy governor in 1689. This company controls the English slave trade out of Africa at this time, and it is for this that he has become a target. For many, he's a good person, viewed by some as an inspirational figure for the cities of both Bristol and London, due to his donations of money to schools and other causes such as almshouses, which would help out the poor and the needy. However, Colston constituted his charities to deny their benefits to those who did not share his religious or political views, and in more recent times it's his activities as a slave trader that have put him in a negative light. From the 1990s onwards, there have been campaigns and petitions for the removal of this statue, describing it as a disgrace. In 1998, slave trader was scrawled on its base. In 2018, Thangam Debonair, Labour MP for Bristol West, wrote to the City Council calling for the removal of this statue. In 2018, an unofficial art exhibition appeared in front of the city centre statue to try and show Bristol's slave trading history and compare it with modern day slavery. The work depicted around 100 human figures lying in front of the statue. They were placed in a similar formation to the way millions of people from West Africa were forced to lie on board slave ships that sailed from Bristol and other English ports to transport slaves to Bristol-based businesses and slave plantations in the Caribbean and North America. A recent petition that was asking again for the removal of the statue had gained over 10,000 signatures and was rising before the events of Sunday, the 7th of June. But why were people protesting? Why would 10,000 plus people go on a march protest during an international pandemic? What would compel these people to take to the streets at a time where protecting public health by maintaining social distancing so that they are not spreading a virus was a major concern? Why would so many people have strong enough feelings that they would potentially feel the need to put themselves and others at risk? The answer lies with events that have been unfolding across the Atlantic Ocean in the United States, but also a long history of how a group within our country feels that they have been treated. This is a picture of George Floyd. George Floyd was arrested on the 25th of May 2020, and while he was being arrested, a police officer knelt on his neck. These events were recorded by a passerby, and he was slowly choked to death. The officer remained kneeling on his neck until he was effectively suffocated. He was heard saying, "I can't breathe," over and over again until he could not say it anymore. Now, the murder of George Floyd by the police angered many people in the United States, and it is one in a long line of incidents where African Americans have been killed by the very people who are meant to be protecting them. The gentleman on the left is Rodney King. He was arrested by police in Los Angeles in 1991. He'd been pursued in a car chase and had been driving at some dangerous speeds, and when he did eventually stop, he was beaten almost to death, and he needed life-saving surgery and spent a long time recovering from his injuries. The events of his arrest were all captured on a video camera. However, the police were cleared of any wrongdoing, and this, as a result, caused widespread riots in Los Angeles in 1992. Fast forward to the killing of Eric Garner in July 2014, and he was arrested for selling single cigarettes. The incident again was caught on camera, and they used a chokehold on him that led to him losing his life. The medical examiner said that his death was a homicide, a death caused by the intentional actions of another person or persons. And the police officer responsible never faced charges, and this caused over 50 demonstrations in the United States at the time. The death of Garner at the hands of the New York police officer and the shooting of Michael Brown around the same time, who was a black teenager, was the starting point for the Black Lives Matter protests. Protesters took to the streets in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014 chanting, "Hands up, don't shoot," in response to the death of Brown, who they say had his hands up in surrender. However, an FBI investigation said otherwise. Since then, there have been the deaths of Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, and Philando Castile, among many others. And these names have become synonymous with police brutality, as Rodney King shows the history and the treatment of African Americans by some police officers in the United States has not changed or adapted. But why do the authorities and the African American community have such a damaged relationship? Throughout American history, African Americans have never enjoyed the same relationship with law enforcement as have white Americans. They have more often been the targets of police actions, both violent, predatory, and hostile in nature, than they have been the object of police protection, particularly in the case of poor and working class communities. And this history of discriminatory policing is, of course, a key factor in leading to the situation we have today. But to understand why there might be racism in police forces in the United States, you have to look back at the racial order in the US and the reason this exists: slavery. Slavery ended with the American Civil War in 1865, but the view and the treatment of African Americans did not suddenly get better overnight. And in fact, in some parts of the United States, it arguably got worse, with lynchings of African American men in the South becoming common. Since the abolition of slavery, stereotypes of black people, and in particular black men, have existed, and they have been portrayed deliberately as dangerous, violent, and a threat. The stereotype of seeing black men as a threat is one that has never gone away, and it has a long standing in American political and social history. So, when a police officer stops a black person, they are statistically more inclined to be more aggressive. Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than a white person. These bar charts on your screen show the numbers African Americans are 3 times more likely to be killed by a police officer, and yet they are also more likely to be unarmed compared to the whites. Black Lives Matter was founded in 2013 in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murder, and the Black Lives Matter Foundation is a global organisation that operates in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. Its mission is to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on black communities by the state and other vigilantes. By combating and countering acts of violence, it's hoped to create space for black imagination and innovation and bring back joy to these communities. It is a movement that is active all over the world, and although there are not the high-profile incidents in the United Kingdom that happen in the United States, there is still a lot of support for it in this country. A black male in the United Kingdom is 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched than a white male. Figures from 2017 to 2018 showed that Met officers were 4 times more likely to use force against a black person than a white person as a percentage of the population. Critics have accused the Metropolitan Police Force of profiling young black men in London. And chokeholds like the one used on George Floyd are allowed to be used by our police forces. So the stereotypes that exist in America are arguably just as prevalent here. So the Black Lives Matter believes it does have a reason to be protesting in this country. Across social media, Black Lives Matter has found ways of sharing and raising the profile of what is happening to the black community. The Black Lives Matter hashtag was first started by Alicia Garza and Patrice Colliers and Opal Tometi as a response to the trial and later acquittal of George Zimmerman, who shot and killed 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, and the hashtag saw a revival in 2014 after the shooting of Michael Brown. Social media has allowed the almost instant sharing of videos, which is how the murder of George Floyd became so high profile. And on Tuesday, the 2nd of June, over 17 million profile pictures on Facebook were blacked out to show solidarity with the movement. Protests have quickly spread around the globe to support the movement. The picture in the top left-hand corner is of an organised protest that took place in Cologne in Germany on the 6th of June, with tens of thousands of people attending. Likewise, the picture in the top right-hand corner is Brisbane in Australia, and again this took place on the 6th of June in response to the protests taking place in America, but also how historically the Aborigines of Australia have also been treated. The bottom left-hand corner is a photo that was taken in Madrid on the 7th of June, again a demonstration against racial inequality, and the bottom right-hand corner is a picture that was taken at a protest in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, the same weekend. If anything, this shows that this time, this movement is a worldwide event. But one question we have to ask, I suppose, is don't all lives matter? Well, they do. And that is not the point of Black Lives Matter. The point of Black Lives Matter movement is to highlight that currently the way the black community is being treated at times is not just in America but around the world needs to change. If I was to make a comparison, if someone said saves the rainforest, you don't answer back, well, we need to save all forests. It's just that the rainforest in particular needs our focus as it is suffering, as the way it is being treated is out of control. So this placard highlights that it is black lives suffering at the hands of the legal system. No one in the Black Lives Matter movement has ever said that only black lives matter. They are making the point that as a community they feel they are under attack and unfairly treated. And this brings me back to Edward Colston. He was, for many in Bristol, in particular the BAME community, which makes up approximately 40% of the city, a symbol of all that was wrong with the system. A reminder of the oppression and racism that has existed and does exist within our country. The damage done to this statue was criminal, but it was, in a way, the people speaking. As a nation, we have a long history of bringing about positive changes through protest. The suffragettes won the right to vote, partly through their long-running campaign of protest, not all of which was peaceful. Working class men in the 1800s campaigned and protested, and as a result eventually won the right to vote through demonstrations, some of which took place in Bristol itself. Towards the end of the 1700s, the abolitionist movement also used protest, through the spreading of literature and the use of the legal system to help end slavery in this country in 1807, and then across the British Empire in 1833, with a campaign led by William Wilberforce in Parliament. And even far back as the Magna Carta, which was signed by King John in 1215, again is another example of a positive change brought about by people protesting through rebellion against the king's actions. The toppling of this statue, if nothing else, has sparked a wider conversation about our history, our involvement as a country, not just in the slave trade, but how through our empire we have been responsible for oppression in other parts of the world, but also how people from the BAME community have been treated and how they are treated. So I would ask you then, Mangotsfield School, for you to stay safe, but for you to seek and understand and learn the arguments for both sides of any debate for yourselves, and not just this one, but any that takes your interest, so that you formulate and have a developed view. Thank you for your time. Take care of yourselves.